The air in the cabin was stale, thick with the smell of recycled air and 100 different lives crammed into a metal tube. Maya Lawson felt that thickness in her head, a dull pressure right behind her eyes. This was the last leg. Just this 4-hour hop from Chicago to Phoenix, and then her brutal 4-day rotation was done. She could almost feel her own bed, the beautiful, heavy silence of her empty apartment. But first, she had to get through this. The flight had been cursed from the start. A late inbound aircraft, a frantic ground crew, and a full cabin of passengers already simmering with frustration from a 2-hour delay. Maya and the other 3 flight attendants had worked like a single, sweating organism to get everyone boarded, stowed, and settled. Her smile, a professional tool she'd honed over 10 years, felt brittle, like old plastic dock her section was first class. Usually a respite with more space and often more experienced travelers. Today, it felt like a gilded cage. In seat 2A, by the window, was him. He'd boarded early, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent. He was probably in his 40s, with a clean-shaven head and an intense focus on the laptop open on his tray table. He'd acknowledged her initial greeting with the barest nod, nothing more. The captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing their final pushback. Time for the safety demo. Maya began her routine, moving with practiced ease down the aisle. When she reached row 2, she paused. The man in 2A was still typing, his fingers a soft blur on the keys. His headphones were on. "Sir," Maya said, her voice bright and firm. "We're preparing for departure. I'll need you to stow your laptop for takeoff." He didn't look up. He held up a single finger, a universal gesture for wait. A small, hot ember of irritation glowed in Maya's chest. She'd seen this 1,000 times. The important man, too busy for the rules. She waited a count of 3. The other first-class passengers were watching now, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Sir?" she repeated, leaning in a little. "Federal regulations require all large electronic devices to be stowed. I need you to close it up now, please." This time, he glanced up. His eyes were a dark, cool brown, meeting hers for just a second before flicking back to his screen. "In a moment. I just need to finish this." His tone was flat, not rude, but utterly dismissive. It was the "in a moment" that did it. That particular phrase, used by 100 entitled passengers who thought the world moved on their schedule. The hot ember in her chest burst into a small flame. The exhaustion, the delayed flight, the aching feet. The smile that hurt her face, it all coalesced into one sharp point of anger. The head flight attendant, a weary veteran named Linda, was watching from the galley, her expression warning. But Maya was past subtle warnings. She straightened up, her voice losing its melodic customer service quality. It became clear, loud, and carried perfectly to the surrounding rows. "Sir, the rules apply to everyone on this aircraft. They are not a suggestion. If you cannot comply with crew member instructions, I will have to log you as a non-cooperative passenger. That comes with significant penalties." There was a beat of absolute silence in first class. You could hear the hum of the air vents. The man in 2A slowly stopped typing. He looked up, this time letting his gaze settle fully on her. He took his headphones off. His face was unreadable, a calm mask. "You are creating a scene," he said, his voice low and even where none was necessary. He didn't sound angry. He sounded analytical, like he was stating a simple fact. "I was finishing a time-sensitive communication. It is now done." He closed his laptop with a soft click and slid it into the bag at his feet, his movements deliberate and slow, never breaking eye contact with her. Maya felt a flush creep up her neck. His calmness was worse than shouting. It made her feel foolish, like a child throwing a tantrum. The other passengers looked away, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes or the safety card in the seat pocket. The victory, if you could call it that, tasted like ash. She had forced compliance, but she felt stripped of all authority, laid bare by his quiet reproach. "Thank you," she said, the word tight in her throat. She turned on her heel and walked back to the galley. Her knees a little weak. Linda was already pouring coffee into a ceramic first-class mug. She didn't look at Maya. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. "Fine," Maya muttered, smoothing her scarf. "Just another prince who thinks the rules are for the little people." "Maybe," Linda said, handing her the coffee to deliver. "But pick your battles, honey. That one, he's not sweating. People who sweat are nervous." He wasn't nervous. Maya pushed the comment aside. The plane taxied, accelerated, and lifted into the air with a roar. As they climbed, the familiar routines soothed her jagged nerves. Drink service. Meal service. She worked mechanically, her smile back in its fixed position. She avoided direct eye contact with 2A, placing his meal and a can of ginger ale on his tray with a sterile "Here you are, sir." He accepted it with a quiet "Thank you," his attention already back on a folder of documents, but the interaction had left a stain on the flight. Every time she passed his seat, she felt a prickle on the back of her neck. Her mind replayed it over and over. Had she been too harsh? Maybe he really was in the middle of something critical. But no, the rules were the rules. Safety was paramount. He was wrong. She clung to that dot about halfway through the flight. Linda approached her in the mid-galley, her face carefully neutral. "Maya, the gentleman in 2A, has asked to speak with the lead flight attendant and the captain." He was very specific. The prickle on Maya's neck turned into a cold trickle of dread. So he was making a formal complaint. Of course he was. People like him always did. They couldn't just let it go. "Great," Maya sighed, the weariness flooding back. "Just what I need. A write-up waiting for me in Phoenix." Linda's expression was odd, not quite pity, but something close to apprehension. "Just come on. Let's get it over with." Maya followed Linda to the flight deck door. Linda knocked in the specific pattern, and it swung open from inside. The cockpit was a nest of softly glowing lights and screens. The captain, a man with a kind face and gray at his temples, turned his seat slightly. He didn't look like his usual jovial self. And there, standing just inside the crowded space, was the man from 2A. He seemed even taller in the confined area. He had taken off his suit jacket, and his posture was relaxed but purposeful. "Captain," Linda began, "this is the flight attendant in question, Maya Lawson. Maya, the passenger from 2A, wished to speak with us." Maya drew a breath, ready to launch into her defense. She met the passenger's eyes, bracing for the complaint, but it was the captain who spoke first, his voice unervingly formal. "Ms. Lawson," he said, glancing nervously at the man beside him. "This is Mr. Thorne." The man, Mr. Thorne, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His cool gaze fixed on Maya. "Your point about the rules was technically correct," he began, and his voice held no malice, just a chilling, factual clarity. "But your execution was a public spectacle. It wasn't about safety at that moment. It was about making a point, using me as an example in front of an audience. That is poor service. That is a liability." Maya's mouth was dry. Her rehearsed defenses evaporated. Before she could utter a word, the captain cleared his throat, his eyes wide. He added the sentence that changed everything, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thorne is the majority shareholder and chairman of the board of Aura Airlines." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. The noise of the engines, the hum of the instruments, the very air in the cockpit, it all receded into a high-pitched whine. She stared at the man, at Mr. Thorne, the billionaire owner of the airline, the man who signed her paychecks, the man whose company handbook she had just publicly and petulantly wielded against him. Every detail of their interaction flashed before her eyes, her sharp tone, her loud pronouncement, her glare of triumph. The flame of her anger was snuffed out, replaced by a void of pure, cold horror. She was frozen. Not just still, but utterly, profoundly frozen, as if the blood in her veins had turned to ice. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stand there in the blinding, terrible light of her catastrophic mistake. For a long moment, there was only the steady, hollow roar of the engines. The sound seemed to fill up Maya's head, pushing out every coherent thought. She stared at the man, Mr. Thorne, and his face was just a collection of features now. The cool, assessing eyes, the set line of his mouth, the clean angle of his jaw. The words chairman of the board echoed in the silence he left, bouncing around the cramped flight deck. The captain shifted in his seat, the leather creaking. The head flight attendant, Linda, was a statue beside her. Maya realized her own hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms. The sharp little pain was the only thing that felt real. Mr. Thorne broke the silence, his voice still that same even, unruffled tone. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the engine noise like a blade. "We'll discuss this on the ground," he said. His eyes hadn't left Maya's face. "For now, you may return to your duties." It was a dismissal. Simple, absolute. He turned his attention back to the captain, effectively erasing her from the space. The message was clear. The conversation with her was over. The consequences were not. Somehow, her legs moved. She backed out of the flight deck, Linda following, pulling the door shut with a solid, heavy thud that felt final. In the bright fluorescent light of the forward galley, Linda let out a long, shaky breath she'd been holding. "Oh, honey," she whispered, her professional mask finally cracking into sheer disbelief. "You struck the owner. You publicly reprimanded the man who owns this plane." Maya leaned against the cool metal of the galley wall, the world tilting slightly. "I didn't know," she said, her voice a thin, strained version of itself. "Doesn't matter," Linda said, her voice full of a grim practicality. "He knows. And everyone in first class saw it. They all just got a front row seat to the shortest career in aviation history." The rest of the flight passed in a sick, blurry dream. Maya moved through her routines like a ghost. Pick up the trash. Offer coffee. Smile. Her smile felt like a crack in plaster. Every time she entered the first-class cabin, her skin prickled. She couldn't bring herself to look at row 2. She felt his presence like a physical weight, a dark star pulling at her from the window seat. The other passengers looked at her differently now. Their glances were quick, curious, some faintly pitying. They'd all heard her. They'd all seen her stand her ground. Now, they knew the ground had just opened up beneath her feet. The cheerful facade of the cabin felt like a cruel joke. When the plane began its descent into Phoenix, the sinking feeling in Maya's stomach matched the aircraft's gentle drop. The wheels touched down with a chirp and a rumble, a normally comforting sound that now felt like a verdict. As the plane taxied to the gate, the head flight attendant got a message on her company phone. She read it, her lips pressed into a tight line, and then looked at Maya. "You're to report directly to corporate headquarters tomorrow morning at 9, she said quietly. "HR on the 20th floor. Don't go to crew scheduling. Don't pass go." Maya just nodded. What was there to say? The moment the seatbelt sign blinked off, it was chaos as usual, people standing, opening bins, the impatient scramble to get off. But in first class, there was a strange, orderly pause. Mr. Thorne stood, collected his bag and his jacket. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look at her. He simply stepped into the aisle and walked off the plane. A flight attendant at the door stammering a thank you, "Sir," that he acknowledged with the same slight nod he'd given Maya hours before. Gathering her own crew bag felt like lifting a bag of rocks. The walk through the jet bridge, through the bustling terminal, felt endless. The familiar sights and sounds of her home base airport, the voices on the loudspeaker, the rolling suitcases, the smell of fast food felt alien. Like she was already an outsider. That night, in her quiet apartment, the dread set in properly. She paced, she made tea and didn't drink it. She stared at the blank television screen. She'd worked for Airlines for 10 years. It was a tough job, but it had been her job. She'd bought this small condo with it. She had friends, a routine, a life built around the flying schedule. It could all be gone because of one bad moment, one flash of temper at the end of a long, hard-stretched out. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers cold. She typed his name into the search bar. Elias Thorne. The screen filled with images. There he was, but not as she'd seen him. In these pictures, he was in sharp focus, often at the edge of some tech conference stage or in a rare Forbes interview. He was a ghost in the business world, they said. A prodigy who'd made his first fortune in software, then quietly started buying up struggling companies in old industries, shipping, manufacturing, and 2 years ago, a floundering airline. He'd taken Aura from the brink of bankruptcy, the article said, not with flashy ads, but with brutal operational efficiency and a quiet focus on rebuilding its fleet. Words jumped out at her: ruthless, strategic, private, demanding. One quote from a former executive read, "He doesn't get angry. He just gets effective." And you find yourself gone. She shut the laptop, the glow of the screen fading in the dark room. Effective. She was about to be effectively fired. The next morning, she put on her best dark suit, the one she wore for interviews and funerals. It felt appropriate. The corporate headquarters was a sleek glass tower downtown, a world away from the rumble and grease of the airport. The lobby was all marble and hushed voices. She checked in at security, her name on a list, and was given a visitor's badge that felt like a brand. The elevator ride to the 20th floor was silent and too fast. The HR reception area was calm, tasteful. A woman with a polite, unreadable smile directed her. "Mr. Thorne's office suite. Down the hall to the right. They're expecting you." Mr. Thorne's office, not HR. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was worse. He wasn't handing her off to some sympathetic HR person. He was handling it himself. She pushed open a heavy wooden door into an anteroom where an executive assistant sat. The man didn't smile. "Miss Lawson, go right in." The office beyond was not what she expected. It wasn't overly huge or flashy. The wall behind the desk was all glass, showing a stunning, silent view of the city and the distant mountains. But the desk itself was clear. No computer, no piles of paper. Elias Thorne was not sitting behind it. He was standing at a small round conference table by the window. 2 other people were there, a man and a woman in severe, expensive-looking suits. Lawyers. Thorne looked up as she entered. He was in a simple black sweater and trousers today, looking more like a tech executive than an airline tycoon. He gestured to an empty chair at the table. "Sit." She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her back painfully straight. He didn't sit down. He looked at the 2 lawyers and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Give us the room." The lawyers stood without a word, collected their pads, and left, closing the door with a soft click. Now it was just the 2 of them, the vast city spread out silently below. He studied her for a moment. She forced herself to meet his gaze. The fear was a cold ball in her stomach, but she was done shrinking. Yesterday, he began, his voice quiet in the spacious room, you saw a black man in a suit being difficult. You made an assumption. You decided to make a public example of him. You judged a book by its cover. He paused, letting the words hang. They weren't shouted, but they landed with the weight of stones. I, he continued, saw an employee who had the authority to enforce rules, but not the wisdom to understand context, not the emotional intelligence to de-escalate. You had a tool, your authority, and you used it like a hammer. He finally took the seat opposite her. I own this airline, Miss Lawson. I don't just own the plane. I own the cover you judged. I own the rule book you quoted. I own the consequences of that kind of behavior playing out in front of 50 high-value customers. Maya's throat was tight. I was enforcing safety protocol, she managed to say, though the words sounded weak, defensive, even to her. You were enforcing your frustration, he corrected, his voice still calm. There's a difference. The result is a liability. A first-class cabin is not a classroom, and my passengers are not children to be scolded. Your employment with Aura Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. The words, though expected, were a physical blow. The air left her lungs. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap, and saw they were trembling. 10 years. Gone. However, he said. She looked up. He was watching her closely, as if measuring her reaction. I am offering you a choice. You can walk out that door now. You will receive a standard severance package based on your tenure. You will be eligible for rehire at another carrier in time, once this is in your past. It's the clean break. He leaned forward slightly. Or you can spend the next 30 days here, not as a flight attendant. You will shadow my executive team. You will sit in on operational meetings, strategy sessions, budget reviews. You will see, from this side of the table, exactly what it takes to run this house you so confidently policed. You will learn what that man on the laptop was actually working on, and why a moment of his time might be worth more than your entire year's salary. At the end of 30 days, we will meet again. No guarantee of reinstatement. No promise of a new job. Just an education. He sat back. The choice is yours. Take the severance and the clean exit, or take the education and the hard road. The air in the office was so still. Maya could hear the faint, distant hum of the city through the glass wall. The two choices hung in the space between them, as real and solid as the table. The first choice, the severance, the clean break, felt like a trap door. She could vanish through it, escape this unbearable pressure, and lick her wounds in private. She could tell her friends she'd quit, that she needed a change. She could maybe even get a job with another airline in 6 months, a year, and pretend this never happened. It was the safe, sensible, utterly shameful way out. The second choice felt like walking into a firing squad. 30 days in this building, under his eye, surrounded by people who would see her as a cautionary tale, a punished employee forced to sit in the corner. An education? It sounded like a public humiliation, stretched out and formalized, but something stubborn in her chest, the same part that had stood up to him on the plane, tightened. Taking the money and running felt like admitting he was right about everything, that she was just a hammer, that she hadn't earned the right to her own pride, however misplaced it had been. She looked at him. He was waiting, his expression giving away nothing. He wasn't enjoying this. He was just conducting business, the education, she said. Her voice sounded rough, but it didn't shake. A flicker of something, not surprise. Maybe assessment passed behind his eyes. He gave a single slow nod. All right. Start tomorrow. 8 a.m. My assistant will give you a schedule and a temporary pass. You will be treated as a corporate observer. You will listen. You will learn. You do not speak in meetings unless directly asked. Understood? Understood. Good. Dismissed. She walked out of the office, past the silent assistant, through the hushed corridors, and back down to the lobby. The sun outside was blinding. She felt numb. She had just signed up for a month of hell. Asterisk, 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 the next morning she returned. Her temporary pass had no title, just her name and the word observer. It felt like a label for a bug under a glass dot. The first week was a form of torture unlike any she'd ever known. It wasn't busy work. It was immersion. She was handed a stack of binders and a tablet with access to internal reports. She was shuffled from meeting to meeting, a ghost in a chair by the wall. She sat in a room where managers argued over the cost of chicken versus pasta in economy class. A debate that stretched for 2 hours over pennies per meal, multiplied by millions of flights. She listened to the head of maintenance explain, with grim urgency, the aging engines on the A320 fleet and the impossible choice: ground planes and cancel flights, or risk higher breakdowns. She saw the raw panic in a logistics manager's eyes when a hurricane shut down their biggest hub, and watched the team scramble to reroute thousands of passengers, their faces lit by the blue glow of crisis maps. And through it all, she saw him, Elias Thorne. He wasn't in every meeting, but when he entered a room, the atmosphere changed. The air got sharper. People sat up straighter. He didn't yell. He asked questions. Short, quiet, devastating questions. Why is that number red? What is the root cause, not the symptom? Who is accountable for this bottleneck? Explain it to me like I'm 10 years old. He listened, his gaze fixed on the speaker, and people tripped over their words. He could dissect a 50-page financial report in minutes, finding the one weak assumption. She saw him, in a budget review, silence a vice president who was blowing smoke about projected synergies. "Stop selling me the dream," Thorne had said, his voice like ice. "Sell me the math. The math is all that flies." This was the man she'd accused of being an entitled rule breaker. He lived in a world of rules of economics, of physics, of contracts. The rule book she knew was a tiny, dog-eared pamphlet compared to the library he operated in. One afternoon, she was observing a meeting about crew resource utilization, fancy talk for flight attendant schedules. A young executive, sharp and confident, was presenting a new algorithm he'd developed. It promised to make crew pairing more efficient, saving the company nearly $1 million a year. It looked perfect on the shiny slides. Thorne had been quiet, scrolling through the data on his own tablet. He looked up. Run the model for the holiday peak. Thanksgiving through New Year's. The executive tapped a key. The screen changed. Some of the elegant lines on the graph turned jagged, spiking into red zones. "Your model breaks under pressure," Thorne stated. "It maximizes efficiency, but removes all flexibility. What happens when a crew member gets sick in Omaha during a snowstorm on December 23rd? Your perfect pairings shatter, and you have no resilience. You've saved $1 million to create a $5 million operational meltdown." He pushed the tablet away. Build a model for reality, not for a textbook, again. The executive deflated like a balloon. Maya, sitting in the back, felt a sudden, unexpected pang. She'd been that crew member stuck in Omaha. She knew the human cost of those efficiencies, the exhausted, crying flight attendant trying to get home to her kids on Christmas Eve. The brilliant young man at the front of the room had never seen her. He'd only seen the numbers dot, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe, in a different way, she had been guilty of the same thing. She'd seen a man breaking a rule, but she hadn't seen anything else. The most humbling moment came at the end of the second week. She was in Thorne's outer office, waiting to follow him to another meeting. His assistant was pulling a document from the printer. It was a draft of a new company-wide initiative. The title read, Project Steady Wing, a holistic review of frontline employee support and compensation. Curiosity got the better of her. "What's that?" she asked quietly. The assistant, a middle-aged man who had been kind but distant, glanced at her. "Something he's been pushing for a year. The board hates it. Too expensive. It's his baby, though. Better mental health resources. Guaranteed minimum rest between rotations. A restructure of the pay scale for flight attendants and gate agents." He handed her a copy. "He says the front line is the brand. Says if we don't take care of the people wearing the wings, the whole thing falls apart." Maya took the folder, her fingers feeling clumsy. She skimmed the bullet points. It was everything her colleagues complained about in the galley. Everything they whispered was impossible. It was all here, in dry corporate language, with cost projections and phased rollouts. This was the time-sensitive communication on his laptop? Not some stock deal, but a fight to get her and people like her better working conditions? She felt the room tilt slightly. The man she had painted as the ultimate, uncaring boss was in a silent war with his own board to give her more money and more rest. The disconnect was so vast it made her dizzy. Later that day, she was in a large strategy meeting. Thorne was at the head of the table. The topic was customer satisfaction scores. They were dipping, especially in economy. The executives tossed around ideas. Better snacks, newer seatback screens, loyalty point bonuses. Maya listened, the thick Project Steady Wing binder heavy on her lap. She thought of the exhaustion she'd felt that day on the plane. The brittle smile. She thought of the chicken versus pasta debate. The passengers weren't angry about the snacks. They were angry because they could smell the exhaustion on us, she thought. They could taste the frustration in the cheap food. The discussion swirled around her. A vice president suggested a new advertising campaign about the human touch. Without thinking, Maya spoke. Her voice was quiet in the big room, but it cut through the chatter. They know it's not human. Every head turned to look at the observer in the corner. Thorne's eyes locked onto hers. His expression was unreadable. She swallowed, her heart pounding. "You can't advertise the human touch," she said, forcing herself to keep going, to look at the table of suits. The passengers. They're not stupid. They see us. They see when we're tired, when we're stretched too thin, when we're serving them food we know is terrible because we got the cheaper contract. They hear it in our voices. You can put a new screen in front of them, but if the person handing them a blanket is dead behind the eyes because they haven't had a day off in 2 weeks, the screen doesn't matter. The touch is broken before it starts. There was a long, heavy silence. A man with silver hair cleared his throat, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Thank you for the frontline perspective," he said, his tone dismissive. But Thorne was still looking at her. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply said, "Continue with the marketing proposal, David." The meeting moved on, but as they filed out an hour later, Thorne paused as he passed her chair. He didn't look at her. He just spoke, his voice so low only she could hear. "The broken touch," he said. "Note that down. Use it in your final report." Then he was gone, leaving her standing there, a strange, fierce heat spreading through her chest. It wasn't praise. It was an acknowledgement. For the first time since she'd walked into this building, she didn't feel like a bug under glass. She felt like she might, just maybe, have something to say. The days began to blur into a rhythm. Maya was no longer just a ghost in the room. After her outburst about the broken touch, people started to look at her differently. Not with warmth, but with a wary curiosity. She was the flight attendant who had stood up to Thorne and was now being forced to see how the sausage was made. Some pitied her. Some saw her as a spy for the boss. But in a few meetings after Thorne left, a brave manager might ask, "So, from your view, how would that play out on a real flight?" She started to speak more, but only when asked. Her answers were short, practical, grounded in the gritty reality of cramped galleys and delayed passengers. She talked about the compounding effect of small things, how a 15-minute delay on the first flight of a 4-day rotation could mean a crew missing their legally required rest, starting the next day already exhausted. She explained why a new policy about personal item storage, dreamed up in this quiet office, would cause absolute chaos at a crowded gate in Atlanta. Her education became a two-way street. She learned about fuel hedging and aircraft leasing, and they learned about human beings. She saw Thorne in a new light, too. The ruthless businessman was still there, the one who could silence a room with a look. But she began to see the shape of his vision, and it was more complicated than just making money. He was fighting a war on two fronts, against the competition and against the old, tired habits of the industry itself. Project Steady Wing was his secret weapon for the latter, and he was slowly, stubbornly, pushing it through by rerouting funds and outmaneuvering resistant board members. One Tuesday, a crisis hit. A social media video went viral. It showed a young flight attendant, her voice trembling with tears, trying to calm a passenger who was screaming in her face over a lost bag. The passenger was recording, goading her. The flight attendant finally broke, shouting back before fleeing to the galley. The video was brutal. The headline was worse. Airline crew meltdown goes viral. The executive team was summoned to the crisis war room. The air was thick with panic. The head of public relations, a woman with a perfectly calm voice and terrified eyes, was laying out the strategy. "We need to distance. We express regret for the customer's experience. We announce the flight attendant has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. We offer the passenger compensation. We control the narrative." Maya, sitting in her usual corner, felt sick. She knew that flight attendant. Not personally, but she knew her. The exhausted tilt of her shoulders, the crack in her voice, that was a person at the very end of their rope. Throwing her to the wolves felt like a betrayal of everything. Thorne was listening, his fingers steepled. "And what is the investigation likely to find?" he asked, his voice quiet. The head of legal spoke up. "Policy states crew must remain professional at all times." She engaged in a shouting match. "However provoked, it's a violation. Termination is the probable outcome." "To save face," the PR woman added. Thorne was silent for a long moment. He looked around the table, at the nods of agreement. Then his gaze drifted to the corner, to Maya. "You've been quiet. What's the view from the trenches?" All heads turned to her. The pressure was immense. This wasn't about chicken or pasta. This was about a person's career, a life. She took a breath. "If you fire her," Maya said, her voice clear in the tense room, "you'll win this news cycle and lose the entire crew. Every flight attendant, every gate agent will see that video and see themselves. They'll see that when the pressure gets too much, when a passenger decides to break you for likes on the internet, the company's solution is to cut you loose to save its own skin." She leaned forward. "You're talking about controlling a narrative. But the narrative inside the airline will be that we're on our own. That the human touch is a lie you sell to passengers, not something you actually give to your own people." The PR woman frowned. "We have to protect the brand." "The brand is the people wearing the uniform," Maya fired back, a heat in her voice she couldn't suppress. "Right now, that brand feels terrified and abandoned. You can't fix that with a press release." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Thorne watched the debate play out on his team's faces. He stood up. "Pull the crew records for that flight," he instructed an assistant. I want to see her schedule for the last month. I want the delay history for every leg she worked. I want to know if she filed a fatigue report. He turned to the PR head. We are not placing her on leave. We are placing her on paid administrative support. Draft a statement. Say we are investigating the full context of the incident, including the documented harassment of our employee and the operational pressures that preceded it. Say we stand behind our crew's right to a safe and respectful workplace. And get me the passenger's name. We're banning him from our airline for life. There was a stunned silence. The legal counsel sputtered. Sir, the liability of having a demoralized, fearful workforce is greater, Thorne cut in. Do it. As the teen scrambled, Thorne walked to the door. He paused, looked back at Maya, and gave a single brief nod. It wasn't a smile. It was a signal. They were on the same side of this particular battle. The next day, he called her into his office. It was just the two of them again. The city glittered behind him. That was the right call, he said simply. You saw the human cost, not just the legal risk. That is the difference between managing and leading. Maya just nodded, a strange sense of solidarity warming her. Your 30 days are almost up, he said, sitting down. I want your final report. Not a list of what you learned. I want a proposal. 1 page. What is the single most impactful change we could make to fix the broken touch? Think beyond money. Think about dignity. That night, Maya didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by her notes, her old flight manuals, the binders from Project Steady Wing. She thought about the crying flight attendant. She thought about her own breaking point. She thought about the young executive's perfect, brittle algorithm. The answer, when it came to her, was stupidly simple. It was so obvious it was invisible. The next morning, she handed Thorne a single sheet of paper. The proposal had just one main heading. He read it, his face impassive. He read it again. Then he looked up at her. Explain. It's not about more pay or more rest, though those are vital, Maya said, her heart pounding. It's about agency. It's about giving the front line a real voice before the breaking point. Right now, we are just instruments of policy. We have no way to say, this policy will not work, until it fails spectacularly on a viral video. Her proposal was for a crew council, not a union, but a rotating group of active flight attendants, aid agents, and ramp workers. They would meet monthly with a direct line to the executive team. They would be the first to review new operational policies, customer service initiatives, and scheduling changes. They would have the data, the same data the executives saw, and the power to say, here is where your perfect model meets our messy reality. It's about respect, she finished, her voice quiet but firm. It's about acknowledging that the person in the aisle knows things the person in the boardroom doesn't. It stops us from being just numbers in an algorithm. It reconnects the touch. Thorne stared at the paper for a long time. The silence stretched. Maya prepared for dismissal, for him to tell her it was naive, impractical. Finally, he set the paper down. All right, he said. Maya blinked. All right? We'll pilot it. 6 months. You'll help set it up. You know the people. You speak both languages now, the cabin and the boardroom. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. You were right about one thing on that flight, Maya, he said. She stopped, her hand on the door. The rules do apply to everyone. I was distracted. I was prioritizing one part of the business over the immediate environment. That was a failure of leadership on my part. You took a punishment and turned it into an education. For both of us. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say she was rehired. But he acknowledged a shared fault and a shared lesson. It was more than she ever expected. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "Don't thank me," he replied, a hint of something almost like dryness in his tone. "The hard work starts now. You've just volunteered to rebuild an airline from the inside out. Welcome to the real turbulence." The next 6 months were a whirlwind, a different kind of exhaustion. Maya traded her flight attendant uniform for business casual, but her world was no longer the quiet order of the 20th floor. It was a messy, loud, hopeful middle ground. Her first task was finding the people for the crew council. She didn't want the usual faces, the ones who always complained in the galley but never did anything. She also didn't want the company cheerleaders. She needed the skeptics with sharp eyes, the quiet veterans who knew every trick in the book, the new hires who still remembered what it felt like from the outside. She spent days in airport crew lounges, buying coffees, listening. At first, people were wary. She was the one who'd been fired, then vanished into corporate. Some thought she was a spy. But when she laid out the idea, not a suggestion box, but a real seat at the table with the power to review policies before they launched, she saw a flicker of cautious interest in their eyes. The first meeting of the crew council was held, not in the sleek executive conference room, but in a bright, noisy training room at the airport. There were 12 of them, flight attendants, a gate supervisor, a lead ramp agent. The tension was thick enough to cut. A veteran attendant with silver hair and a no-nonsense stare spoke first. "So, we're here to make them feel better about themselves, while they do what they were going to do anyway?" Maya shook her head. She pushed a folder to the center of the table. "This is the new customer feedback system they're about to roll out. Digital surveys sent before the seatbelt sign is even off. It goes live in 60 days. Our job in this room is to tear it apart. Tell me why it's stupid." There was a pause. Then the gate supervisor, a man with tired eyes, picked it up. 60 seconds after landing, people are grabbing their bags, checking their phones. They're not thinking about their coffee. They're thinking about their connection. "You'll get garbage data?" The ramp agent chimed in. "And what about the older passengers? Or people without smartphones? You're only hearing from one kind of voice." The conversation caught fire. For 2 hours, they dismantled the program, not with anger, but with the precise knowledge of people who lived the consequences. Maya took furious notes. She didn't defend the plan. She facilitated its execution. The next week, she presented their collective feedback to the product team. She walked in with the council's proposed changes. Delay the survey by 24 hours. Offer a simple phone-in option. Add a specific question about airport connectivity. The product manager, a young tech whiz, bristled. "This compromises the immediacy of the data." Maya held up a printout of the council's notes. "This is the reality of your immediacy. You're getting data from people rushing to a bathroom. Is that the truth you want to build on?" She had the data, the human context, and the quiet, unspoken authority of Thorne's backing. The changes were adopted. Word spread. Slowly, the council stopped being a curiosity and started becoming a conduit. When a new uniform fabric was proposed, the council tested it, reporting back that it didn't breathe during a 15-hour turnaround in Singapore. The fabric was changed. When scheduling proposed a new high-efficiency turnaround checklist, the council pointed out 3 steps that would cause bottlenecks at the aft galley. The checklist was redesigned. Maya was the translator, moving between 2 worlds that had only shouted at each other before. She learned to speak the language of key performance indicators and quarterly reports, but she always carried the voice of the cabin with her. One afternoon, about 4 months in, Thorne summoned her. He had a report in his hand, the latest metrics on crew turnover. The numbers were edging downward for the first time in years. "It's working," he said, not with celebration, but with the satisfaction of a proven hypothesis. The council is more than a committee. It's a pressure valve. And a mirror. They just wanted to be heard, Maya said. Not to be right all the time. Just to know that their experience counted for something. He nodded. You built a bridge. Now, I need you to walk across it for good. He slid a formal letter across the desk. The title read, Offer of Employment, Vice President of In-Flight Experience and Employee Engagement. Maya stared at the words. The salary was a number that made her head swim. The responsibility was terrifying. I'm not a vice president, she said quietly. You are exactly that, he countered. You understand the product from the inside out. You can speak to the crew without condescension and to the board without fear. That is the rarest skill in this building. The job is to make the human touch real, to institutionalize what you started. She thought of the plane, of her public humiliation. She thought of the crying flight attendant in the video, who was now back at work, supported, not scapegoated. She thought of the council members, who now walked a little taller through the terminal. I'll need to keep a foot on the planes, she said. Not as an observer, as working crew, a few times a quarter. To remember, to listen. A ghost of something near a smile touched Thorne's lips. Consider it a mandatory part of the job. She took the letter. Okay. A year later, Maya walked through the bustling headquarters. The place no longer felt like a museum of quiet dread. There was an energy to it. She passed the new training academy, where a class of future flight attendants was in session. Through the glass, she heard the instructor, a former council member, say, And remember, your primary job is safety. Your second job is service. But your tool for both is judgment. Every passenger has a story. Your job is not to write it for them before they've even sat down. Maya paused, listening. The words were different, but the lesson was etched in her bones. She continued to her office, a space with a view, but also with a framed photo on her desk of her first crew council, smiling, surrounded by coffee cups and marked up documents. Her work was a constant negotiation, a push and pull between the possible and the practical. She had battles she lost, but she had more that she won. Later that day, she was heading to a budget review. As she passed the main executive conference room, she saw him. Elias Thorne was inside, standing at the head of the table, pointing to a graph on a screen. His posture was the same, focused, intense, demanding. The people around the table were leaning in, not shrinking back. Their eyes met through the glass. He didn't stop his presentation. He didn't nod or smile. But he gave a slight, almost imperceptible lift of his chin. A brief acknowledgement between two professionals who had, through a clash of failures and a stubborn choice for something harder, built a new kind of understanding. Maya returned the gesture with a small, sure nod of her own. Then she turned and walked down the hallway, the sounds of the vibrant, complicated airline she helped steer humming around her. The journey had started at 30,000 feet with a spark of anger, plummeted to the depths of professional ruin, and found its course not in going back, but in building something new from the wreckage. She wasn't just following rules anymore. She was helping to write them, with a pencil that had been sharpened on both ends by the reality of the cabin and the responsibility of the boardroom. The ascent, she had learned, wasn't about altitude. It was about clarity. And for the first time in a long time, the view was clear.